May I now call the meeting to order? We've got a quorum already. Agenda item number 1. Strategic studies for artificial islands in the central waters. I think the administration's team has already arrived. Members, you can refer to the attendance list for the names of officials present. So may I now invite the administration to give us a PowerPoint presentation, and please be concise. Yes, Mr. White. Thank you, Chairman. In fact, the advanced work started in 2011. So let me give members some background information. In fact, in 2011, we had the exercise or public engagement exercise for the enhancing land supply strategy reclamation outside Victoria Harbour and rock cavern development. Stage 1 public engagement was conducted from November 2011 to March 2012, and there was broad support for a 6-pronged approach for enhancing land supply. It was said that there should be a flexible and diversified land supply strategy, including reclamation outside the Victoria Harbour. And then it was also agreed that there should be adequate land reserves. And so we consulted the public on reclamation, and it was proposed by the public that we should take into account the environmental and social impacts of reclamation. And so we identified 5 potential nearshore reclamation sites and the potential of artificial islands. The second phase or second stage public engagement exercise was carried out from March to June 2013. And the public was consulted on the possible land uses for the proposed reclamation sites and artificial islands, as well as the areas of concern to be addressed in future technical studies. So you can see on the left the major uses for the artificial islands that the public find acceptable: residential development, tourism-related facilities, and so on and so forth. And then on the right, you see issues to be covered in future studies: impact on marine ecology, transportation, cost-effectiveness, and so on and so forth. Now we've chosen the central waters because of the following. You can see that for the Hong Kong waters, measuring 1,500 square kilometers, we have mainly the western waters, the central waters, and the eastern waters. And then you can see that there are protected shorelines, and 60% of the protected shorelines are in the eastern waters. And then in the eastern part of Hong Kong, we have country parks, and also geoparks. And so if we need to construct transport infrastructure, then geoparks and country parks may be affected. And also in the eastern waters, the water is rather deep, and there are also very strong monsoons. And so we are of the view that an artificial island will not be a suitable choice for the eastern waters. And then for the western waters, major infrastructural projects are being carried out. And so what remains is the central waters. The ecology is not that complicated, and the ecological value of the central waters is comparatively speaking lower. We haven't decided really on the location of the artificial island, the size, the scale, and so on and so forth. But then a month ago, when we had the first meeting of the Lantau Development Committee, we briefly discussed the East Lantau Metropolis concept. So at Khao Yi Chau, there should be a 600 to 800 hectare artificial island between Lantau and Hong Kong Island, and we also plan to have some reclamation at the at Mui Wo and also at the typhoon shelter. But then concerning the planning parameters, number of people to be housed, all these details can be ironed out only after further studies. And here you can see more or less the future transportation links. Khao Yi Chau, artificial island. So there can be links to Kowloon West, Hong Kong Island West, and also Lantau Island. But of course, there are a lot of constraints, including technical constraints. And CEDD will give members some details later. And that is why we need to carry out further studies and assessment in order that we can find out how complicated the works will be, and then we'll decide on the location of reclamation and the scale of reclamation. And in fact, near Khao Yi Chau, there are locations with the potential to become artificial islands. But then concerning the scale of reclamation and so on and so forth, these can only be known after carrying out further studies. And now I'll ask the CEDD to give members more information about the study area. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. So you can see that this is the study area. This is because we need to carry out technical assessments for possible impacts. So we need to include the central waters and also the nearby areas. And so the study area is bound to be larger than the future works area. And the shaded portion represents the central waters. In other words, Lantau, Cheung Chau, Lama, Hong Kong Island, the waters in this area. And then concerning Cheung Sha and Pui O, there are a lot of protected coastlines, and so reclamation will not be suitable or desirable, and we don't have any plans to develop artificial islands there. We'll carry out technical assessments as well as preliminary planning. We'll take into account environmental and transportation factors, and then we'll identify the possible areas for reclamation and also the location of the artificial island and the scale and so on and so forth. So the scope of the study includes the following. Engineering, feasibility and infrastructure study, including broad reclamation extent and transport links. And of course, we'll also look at the extent of the proposed East Lantau metropolis. And then there will be preliminary land use planning studies for the artificial islands. So we're going to try to plan and develop a East Lantau metropolis with balanced development. And we'll also explore the feasibility of an artificial island in the central waters for different types of land uses. In the planning study, we hope to come up with an initial conceptual development plan, including broad development direction, reclamation extent, land uses, transport infrastructure, and other planning parameters.
Another study area is port operation and marine safety. Within the artificial island, although there's a body of waters, from this slide you can see that we're subject to a number of constraints. In the central waters, there are a great deal of navigation channel. For example, North Cheung Chau, West Lama Channel, and East Lama Channel. And also with anchorage points for vessels. In our study, We have to consider port operation and navigation safety. And then for reinstatement of port facilities, including anchorage points, such that port operation and marine safety will not be undermined as far as possible. We also carry out a strategic environmental study. The central waters, unlike the eastern waters, is not full of high-value ecological sites. But we do have fauna and flora like corals, mangroves, and all sorts of animals and plants. And to the south of Lantau Island, we do have a certain body of waters where we have to preserve the shoreline. So we'll conduct strategic environmental impact studies in order to propose effective mitigation measures. As for reclamation, we'll try as far as possible to explore the possibility of not doing dredging, so as not to impact on ecology, and then water current, noise, water quality, etc. will also be assessed. Besides, we have to conduct fisheries impact assessments. Within the study area were 4 mariculture zones, and to the south we have areas with richer fishing resources. So we'll do on-site inspection and study the impact on the fishing grounds. We also have to look at reclamation and the artificial islands and their impact on the fishes as well as species, and will then recommend appropriate mitigation measures. We'll also consult the relevant stakeholders and carry out site investigation in order to assist with our technical assessment. As for the way forward, our next step will be, after consulting the development panel of the LegCo, we hope that next month we'll propose to the Public Works Subcommittee to upgrade the project to Cat A and then seek funding from the Finance Committee. With this approval, we'll start the study in the second half of 2014 to be completed in the second half of 2017. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. The floor is now open to members to ask questions in accordance with 83A of the Rules of Procedure. If any member has any direct or indirect pecuniary interest in any of the issues discussed, the member will have to disclose the interest as well as its nature before speaking. I suggest we accord 4 minutes to each member, including responses from the administration. So please be concise and precise. Ms. Chan Yun Han, Mr. Gary Fan, Ms. Alice Mack, Dr. Fernando Chung, Mr. Chan Hak Kan, Mr. Michael Tian, Mr. Leung Chi Chung, Mr. Wu Chi Wai, Mr. Albert Chan, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, and Dr. Lo Wai Kwok, Mr. Yu Si Wing as well. So Ms. Chan Yun Han first. Thank you, Chairman. Concerning this development project, I think we have to be very careful. Just now, the CEDD has already informed us of their detailed deliberation. So they've considered the central waters, the western waters, the eastern waters. They've considered the environmental impact, the natural ecology, and so forth. And you have to consider the fishing industry. Here, quite a number of zones proposed will be affected. Well, apart from the consultation conducted by the government, I'd like to know the responses from the stakeholders. What did the fishermen think? What about those friends who are concerned about ecology? What did they think? So I'd like to ask the administration, or perhaps the permanent secretary, whether or not in terms of overall arrangement, they should listen to deputations here in LegCo, Or are they going to tell us that given the completion of PE2, that would be okay? Mr. Y, we'll listen to public views. In PE1 and 2, special meetings had been arranged to listen to public views. As for fisheries and ecology, in PE1 and PE2, concerning the criteria for site selection, we asked the public to give us views, and they're most concerned about ecology and environment. As for fisheries, in PE2, the CEDD and we had, together with 2 fishing associations, carried out certain assessments. Well, given this detailed technical study, we'll advance the fisheries impact assessment in order to identify mitigation measures as early as possible. On the 1st of October 2014, a sustainable development fund had been set up for the fishing industry, so we'll also study how to play the potential of this fund to its full. Ms. Chen Yunhan? Mr. Chairman, for the impact on nature, we must not allow the impact to be too huge. When I attended the NPC meetings, the Premier said that in the past our ecology had been affected for a long, long time. That's why we now have problems for smog and impact on the food chains, etc., etc. We now see a great deal of grave consequences. Now we need land, but we have to take care of ecology as well. Just now the Permanent Secretary said that they had done consultation, but according from what I heard, the fishermen did have views, the environmental protection sector also had views. Well, they will come in May to ask that the project be upgraded to Cat A. So we have a tight schedule. I'd like to have some responses from the administration. Yes, we're concerned about reclamation, but at this juncture, I'd like to listen to the views of the relevant sectors of the community. So, Chairman, may I know what you think about this? And then, Permanent Secretary, how are you going to respond to what I said just now? Mr. Y? Mr. Chairman, we fully agree that we need to attach importance to the EIA. For every project, we have to conduct EIA. We're only doing a preliminary technical impact study. And then when we move on to the detailed technical study, we'll continue to listen to the views of different sectors of the community. As regards environmental impact, just now I said that in PE1, for land enhancement strategy study, the CEDD then carried out an on-field study, including a submarine study, study on marine biology, and studies of the different waters, etc. So eventually we proposed this study on the central waters and the artificial islands. Well, Mr. Chairman, you're from the new territories. The fishermen are very concerned. So I suggest we have a public hearing session. Mr. Gary Fan has also written in, so we'll look into that. Yes, Mr. Chairman, we should invite the relevant associations to come. I'd like to listen to them again. In order to facilitate the government, we should also do that. Mr. Fan, I have 4 questions about East Lantau waters for this artificial island. In 1993, before the handover, the British government also mentioned this. That is, the 4 islands in the vicinity of Khao Yi Chau were considered. And then in the era of Tung Chee Hwa and Donald Tsang, when we had a strategic review on Southwest NT, we also had 2 reclamation projects. Eventually, those were shelved. Has the SARG absorbed lessons, learned a lesson from previous terms of the SARG about this artificial island? Now, what are my 4 questions? The paper indicates that the study area has infringed upon the Victoria Harbour. What about the protection of the harbour ordinance? What about the statutory provisions? And Yam O, Siu Ho Wan, third runway, Tung Chung extension, and East Lantau artificial island. The total area exceeds that of 3,000 Hong Kong Stadium, and over 1,000 hectares of waters would be covered. So what about the environmental capacity? Will study be considered? What about a baseline study on an EIA to study the environmental impact and to minimize pollution? And then for this artificial islands in East Lantau, there's to be consultation, but all along we've not heard of this actual site. But all along, Khao Yi Chau had been selected by the government. Can the government explain why in the whole process of site selection and public consultation, there's a deliberate concealment? Of course, there are certain sites with valuable flora and fauna and animals like corals. Why is it that there's no measure to protect these species before reviving the present proposal? Mr. Y, Mr. Chairman, in the 1990s it's proposed that reclamation be done in the central waters, but of course at that time the theme was the container port. After some studies, we discovered that to establish an artificial island in the central waters, the use would be changed because we would like to turn it into a third CBD in Hong Kong. As for the Victoria Harbour, the CEDD explained very clearly that the study areas cover the Victoria Harbour because the connecting infrastructure facilities may affect the Victoria Harbour. So we have to make sure the Victoria Harbour will not be affected. So the study will cover the Victoria Harbour. As for the reclamation projects mentioned by Mr. Gary Fan, well, Director, you can just avoid those areas. Then the problem will be solved. Well, but those areas may be affected. So our colleagues or consultant engineers involved in the study should make sure the Victoria Harbour should not be affected. As regards offshore reclamation, environmental capacity will be one of our emphases. For those reclamation projects in the Western waters, the CEDD is already studying an accumulative impact assessment. By the end of this year, we should have some results. As for the Eastern, Central, and Western waters, the Central waters is rather independent. So in our funding proposal, the environmental capacity will also be covered. As for the other two aspects, they're connected with environmental protection, that is, the species of wildlife affected. Next member, Ms. Alice Mack. Mr. Chairman, we of course understand that Hong Kong now needs land supply. We understand that in 2011 we had a consultation exercise with this six-pronged approach to boost land supply. We agree. But what about the extra land obtained? They must be able to be used by the public. They shouldn't just be used for the construction of luxury flats with a sea view. They should not just benefit a certain sector of the community. We would like to stabilize housing supply so as to put the public mind at ease. For reclamation in the central waters, I have a number of questions. Apparently, they're proposing that in the vicinity of Khao Yi Chau, an artificial island will be constructed. That's more feasible, according to the administration. But from the information here, we see that marine ecology may be affected. Maybe in the middle of the sea, there are not too many wildlife except corals.
And so when you study the central waters, you of course need to look at what is beneath the the sea. But then an artificial island will affect the water currents, and an artificial island will also affect the ecology on land nearby. And then, of course, if you are to construct an artificial island there, it can't be an isolated island. It has to be connected to Lantau or to Hong Kong Island. So how are you going to provide the links? So is it that the island is going to look like a crab with a few legs branching out to connect to Lantau and Hong Kong Island? How can you make sure that this artificial island will be easily accessible? And your arrangements and proposals must be acceptable to the fishermen and the mariculturalists. Now, we may not go to the central waters too often, but then fishermen rely on the central waters for their livelihood. And so we shouldn't just have our eyes set on development. We have to also take into account the livelihood of those concerned. Yes, Mr. White? Yes, Chairman. I agree with Ms. Mack that we should be concerned about the navigation channels and also the water currents. I want to emphasize that the study will cover all these issues. And in fact, I have already said that there are quite a large number of technical constraints in constructing an artificial island in the central waters, and that's why we need to have this study. And in fact, members have reminded us many times that we need to be concerned about the livelihood of the fishermen. For the Hong Kong waters, the area is about 1,500 square kilometers. But then most of them are in the eastern waters, and that's why we've chosen the central waters for our study. We are going to carry out fisheries impact assessments. We'll communicate with the fishermen as early as possible. We hope to work out mitigating measures, and also we'll see how we can make use of a sustainable fisheries development fund to help affected fishermen. Now, Permanent Secretary, this is going to be a major development, and I hope that you will do whatever you can to make the proposal acceptable to the fishermen and all those concerned. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Fernando Zhang. We're talking about an artificial island with an area of 1 to 2,000 hectares. So this is a major infrastructural project. This artificial island is going to change the appearance of Hong Kong. Here we are talking about the second core business district. Here we're talking about major infrastructural projects to provide transport links. I can say that this is a project of unprecedented scale. So is it really enough to have a discussion in the development panel and then the feasibility study can proceed? There were 2 public engagement exercises. Under stage 1, a 6-pronged approach was proposed, and this approach included reclamation. And at that time, members of the public said that the other 5 options could proceed first, but then there were lots of reservations expressed on the reclamation option. And then we don't know where exactly the artificial island is going to be. For the 5 nearshore reclamation sites, we know the locations and understand that there are some objections, especially the Ma On Shan, Ma Liu Shui site. Now, in fact, we know that you want to have the artificial island at Khao Yi Chau, and recently has been said that there will be an artificial island project at Hei Ling Chau. I think you are trying to deceive the public. There is this Lantau Development Advisory Committee. Is it a statutory committee? What status does it enjoy? Can it have any say on the future development of Lantau? And is it that if the advisory committee makes a decision, then LegCo will have to follow that decision? I don't think so, Chairman. Now, this project is going to have a lot of impact on our ecology, on the community, on the land use in Hong Kong, and also on the commercial and business and industrial development in Hong Kong. And so I think we need to do some consultation work ourselves. I think at least we should conduct a public hearing. And I, in principle, oppose the construction of the artificial islands. I think we shouldn't spend hundreds of millions of dollars to carry out studies for the artificial islands without having tried out the other possibilities and options. Right. So is it that you've tried to hide your Khao Yi Chow proposal from the public? No. In fact, in phase 1 or stage 1, we proposed 25 locations, and one of them was near that area. Why was it that in the second consultation document, Khao Yi Chow was not mentioned? That was because after the first PE, we knew the public's criteria for reclamation, and as a result, we came up with the 5 nearshore reclamation sites and the central waters area. But then for central waters, as I've said, there are a lot of technical complexities, and so we do not want to fix the location. We want to carry out the detailed studies first. But then, Chairman, in the second PE, the Khao Yi Chow option was not put forward. And they are now coming to us for money. We are coming to members for funding precisely because we need to carry out studies. After the studies, then we can carry out more detailed public consultation. I just want to say that our resources in-house are limited and we are not able to carry out very detailed studies. I think the matter should not be studied as there is so much objection from members of the public. Mr. Gary Chen. Chairman, I want to say that many members of the public are very concerned about reclamation. Now, the third runway may be built and reclamation may be required, and then an incinerator may be built and then reclamation may also be required. And so if you are proposing to carry out reclamation works in central waters, then the public can't help suspecting that you've got some objectives in mind. Now, if your objective is to provide housing for the public, then maybe you'll not meet with so much objection. But I want to point out that the public are concerned about the impact of reclamation on marine ecology. The public are also concerned about the impact of reclamation on the fisheries industry. Now, because you know, there is now a trawl ban and there are other measures affecting the fisheries industry. I understand that $15 million will be used to carry out a fisheries impact assessment. Will that assessment only cover the impact on the fisheries industry after reclamation, or will you also cover in that study the sustainable development of the fisheries industry? Because my understanding is that the government has not carried out any such study. So I want to know the use of the $15 million, how it's going to be used. And then, Chairman, as you know, I'm very concerned about how municipal solid waste can be disposed of. Now, assuming that you get the green light from LegCo and you can carry out reclamation works in the central waters, then what materials will you use? Now, because for the SENT fill bank, it's full, and at the moment a lot of fill is transported to Taishan. I understand that in Singapore, MSW is used in reclamation work. So I want to know whether you are going to try this out, whether you are going to also include this in your study. Yes, Mr. Y, Chairman. The first question relates to housing. Now, if we're talking about an artificial island of 600 to 800 hectares, then there will be composite uses, including housing and other developments. And then the a fishery study is going to include on-site studies. And we'll also study how we can increase fisheries resources through the deployment of artificial reefs. We will be carrying out assessments together with the fishermen. And then concerning reclamation materials, we'll try as far as possible to make use of local materials. And if possible, we'll also use MSW. So that will be included as part of our study. Chairman, I wish to follow up. I asked about the fisheries study, and he merely mentioned artificial reefs. Now, in fact, artificial reefs have been deployed for quite some time, and I understand that the effects are not really very good. So are there new ways to help promote the fisheries industry? Yes, we'll work hand in hand with the fisheries industry, Chairman. So we hope that we can help the fisheries industry upgrade itself and modernize itself. So we will welcome comments from the fisheries industry. I think this is really a very official and bureaucratic line to take, Chairman. I think such a reply, such a line can be provided for all replies on all projects. So it seems that the government is not concerned about the sustainable development of the fisheries industry. Now, because so many members are concerned about the impact on the fisheries industry, Chairman, we are now trying to get resources and funding so that we'll be capable of working out solutions together with the fishermen. Mr. Michael Tian. Chairman, this morning we had an FA panel meeting. And we were told that a structural deficit would appear in Hong Kong between 7 years to 15 years down the road. And it was estimated that in the future, the real growth per annum will only be 2.8%. But then we need at least 3.1% per annum in order to avoid a structural deficit. I don't know where the 0.3% per annum can come from. But then in the past 5 years, on the average, Singapore Singapore's economy grew faster than us by 2 percentage points every year. And we asked why, and the administration said Singapore had importation of labor and Singapore had land supply. That was why they had 4.8%. We only had 2.8%. And in fact, the reclamation accounts for 20% of their urban land, but we in Hong Kong only 7%. And concerning Northeast NT, we worked on it for 2 decades, and there will only be land to accommodate 60,000 people. And I think we shouldn't continue to look for housing land in the NT. If we compare ourselves with Singapore, we can see that we really have to work harder in terms of land supply and enhancing land supply, or the structural deficit will come even sooner. In other words, in less than 7 years' time. And so I think we should carry out reclamation projects as soon as possible. I support this funding item. I think we should carry out the studies as soon as possible. And I think when we do planning, it's really best to start from scratch. Now, over the years when we did planning in Hong Kong, it was done on a piecemeal basis. Sometimes there are flats but not jobs, and sometimes there are people but not hospitals, schools, and public transport. And I think over the years, planning in Hong Kong was done in a piecemeal manner. And so I think we should start from scratch. It's good that there can be an artificial island. Chairman, I've got this map. Look at NT West. The West Rail Line, it has already reached capacity. The utilization rate is 100%. And if over 100,000 people move into Hong Shui Q, and then if we provide more housing at Northwest NT, the West Rail simply won't be able to cope. And so we need another harbor crossing in the west, linking this area directly to Hong Kong Island, so we can have a tunnel from Hong Kong Island to the artificial island, and then Siu Lam, and all the way to Twin Moon South Pier. Now, this is going to be the major artery for Hong Kong in the future. This is because we have the Tsuen Wan Line. In the future, we're going to have the Chek Wan O Line and the Sha Tin Central Link.
需要多一條喺西邊。
Then we need another rail line on the western side. The merit of this artificial island is to allow us to do that. And then we have another spur line to the artificial island and the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge. Now, for this artificial island, you definitely plan for a railway. Will you do that? Will you extend it to Twin Moon? That's what I want to ask you. Mr. Y? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Mr. Michael Tian for such a constructive suggestion. In the study area, we'll study different connection lines. Of course, cost effectiveness is one of the factors to be concerned. Railway will definitely be a very important connecting mode of transport. Will you provide a rail line there? I can't say for sure, but it's highly likely that we'll do so. So you'll consider that. Mr. Leung Chi-Chang? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To develop East Lantau and build an artificial island, we can consider certain aspects. Whether or not we can forge consensus on this project, as far as I can see, it may not be that easy. From the papers submitted by you and the remarks made by you, we're more concerned about the environment in the vicinity and marine ecology. I share similar views as Mr. Michael Tian. That's about traffic and transport. For the outlying islands, they're already shocked by the proposed increases in ferry fares and transport fares. Now that you're proposing an artificial island, even though you're going to have a metropolis there, even though you are to have a rail line, it would be better for you to consider other modes of transport as well. Now, these are basic necessities for the ordinary people. If you don't do so, your efforts will prove to be futile. So I'd like to ask about ancillary traffic and transport facilities. For operations offer the artificial island, and on the artificial island, will you have ancillary transport facilities like a rail line? I don't quite agree with your reclamation proposal because the natural environment there is rather good. If you reclaim the bay at Mui Wo, you'll be neither here nor there. The project will be neither fish nor fowl, and the ecology will be affected to a certain extent. Rather, Hailing Chow and Khao Yi Chow can still be considered. Overall speaking, you have to consider public views on ecology as well as marine ecology. As for engineering studies, I don't know what sort of investigation are you going to conduct. Are you going to study the structure of the seabed, for example? Just now, Mr. Chan Hat-Kan mentioned Singapore, where they use garbage to do reclamation. If you are to reclaim over 1,000 hectares of land, the sand, stones, and mud required would be quite huge in quantity. Do we in Hong Kong now have that huge quantity of sand, stones, and mud? Well, basically, there are three questions. Well, rail lines will be the backbone of Hong Kong's transport system, so it will be one of our foci in this study. As I said, railway will be one of the major mode of transport to be considered by us. As for the area of reclamation, we still need to study the details. As for Mui Wo, if there's to be reclamation, to what extent will we do reclamation? For East Lantau Conceptual Plan, if we are to create the East Lantau Metropolis, well, we may, or it's highly likely that we have to reclaim certain waters in Wui Wo. But in Singapore, they use garbage to reclaim land, but not for residential purposes, but for ecological protection. So after we have determined the location and area of reclamation, we'll know more details. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, Mr. Chairman, I have a few questions. First of all, the report says that 1,600 to 2,400 hectares of land will be reclaimed. But just now you said that along or around Khao Yi Chau, 600 to 800 hectares of land will be reclaimed. So where has the remaining area gone? And then, Director, in 2007, there was this Lantau Development Master Plan adopted by the government. Did you give regard to that report? If so, according to that report, Lantau Island is to be totally developed. If that is your choice, I can't accept it. As regards the scope of reclamation, I'd like to know, where will your reclamation focus on? I'd like to know, you have to tell me clearly, where exactly will reclamation be done? Director, Mr. Wai? First of all, we have to carry out a detailed study to determine the location and area of reclamation. I mentioned just now that according to some internal technical assessment, in Khao Yi Chau we can have an artificial island of 600 to 800 hectares. And also in Heiling Chau, similar projects can be done. As for the 1,600 to 2,400 hectares of land to be reclaimed according to the 2007 report, that's the total amount. As for the exact location of the artificial islands, we'll have to carry out a detailed study first before we can finalize our decision. As Ms. Alice Mack said, water current is important, so we'll have to study that first before we can determine the location and area of reclamation. This time, we'll focus on reclamation in the central waters, and Lantau Development Master Plan will, of course, be a major reference for us. As for the third reclamation area, I think I've already provided an answer. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to seek further clarification from the Director. For the Lantau Development Master Plan, I didn't see it as a major parameter in your latest proposal. Will you make that your fundamental assumption? In 2007, the Lantau Development Master Plan will serve as a basis for this particular project, and can reclamation be focused around Khao Yi Chau only and not in other areas? Mr. Wai, as I said, this time we focus on the reclamation project around Khao Yi Chau. As for the Lantau development study, that's of course of significant reference to us, but this time we'll focus on Khao Yi Chau. We have to do detailed study first before we can determine the details, that is the exact location and area of reclamation. Mr. Chairman, the Lantau Development Master Plan is so important because if you want to establish an artificial island, you need to handle ancillary traffic and transport issues. If you don't tell us that 2007 Master Plan won't be a basis, then the whole Lantau can be covered by your latest proposal. Then we cannot have a bottom line to guard against. So if the 2007 report, that is the master plan, is not to be served as a baseline, I really cannot support their present study. Mr. Albert Chan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Concerning major planning decisions, theoretically, the government should complete a territory-wide strategy study first before going to regional planning and then the formulation of the OZP. So there must be these 3 steps before it's reasonable. Well, this time the government is acting hastily. I always say that Hong Kong is now very miserable. C.Y. Leung and Paul Chan only know their respective areas. They only know how to hoard land, and that results in confusion. They want to reclaim land here and there. There's no territory-wide distribution study. In 1987, Li Ka-shing and Wu Ying-sheng already proposed a large-scale reclamation project very similar to this one. That is in as early as 1987. That is before the new airport was proposed by Wilson. They already proposed this. I don't know whether C.Y. Leung has surrendered to Li Ka-shing. I think the proposed direction of development was better than this one. For territory-wide strategies, because of the third runway project, the dolphins might vanish. In fact, from the territory-wide strategies point of view, Chek Lap Kok might be a wrong location for our airport, so you should consider relocating the airport. And then together with the Kwai Ching container port, you have hundreds of hectares of land released for residential developments. You can identify alternative sites for the container port and the runway. That's easier. So in terms of territory-wide strategies, you should consider distribution and redistribution of our land resources. Don't tell us that you would like to create a piece of land right in the middle of our sea. Now, the laymen are leading the professionals. The permanent secretary is from the engineering sector. He should fetch people from the planning sector. In the past, it's the CS for administration who took the lead. David Ford was taking the lead at that time, and now there's so much confusion. Can the permanent secretary consider this project from another angle? I may not totally oppose to your proposed direction, but you have to consider territory-wide demands. You have to be clear about the distribution of land uses. Different sites are for different uses. Then the areas covered, the requirements, etc. will vary. So, Permanent Secretary, can you consider my views? I think the government should take reference from Li Ka-shing's proposal then. That's rather difficult insofar as I'm concerned. Concerning uses, our preliminary view is that we look at the overall layout for the whole of Hong Kong in terms of traffic and transport, etc. Now, for central waters and East Lantau metropolis, they're nearer to the urban areas. But you never consider relocating the airport and the container port. If you can consider that direction, the whole study will be different. Well, central waters are nearer to the urban areas. If they're for business and residential blocks, well, you're not answering my question. You must have a strategic study on relocating the airport and the container port. I'm in the LegCo for 20 years. I've never supported Li Ka-shing. And now I'm asking you to consider Li Ka-shing's proposal then. I'm not trying to confront Li Ka-shing. Well, there's not enough land for such a big artificial island. Did you ever study that proposal from Li Ka-shing and Wu Ying-sheng back in the 1987? Well, I think his reply has slapped Li Ka-shing and Wu Ying-sheng in their face. He is saying that their report and proposal then was not good enough. They already then proposed reclamation in the central waters. Now, these are the maps. In 1987, One Way Pao already reported on that with the maps. Well, they haven't looked at these plans still. They're saying that the conclusions are not adequate. Time's up.
Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, you should have told Mr. Lau earlier. The land, you know, is so expensive, so valuable. And he would have been able to make a lot of money. So we are told that there is going to be an East Lantau metropolis. Can I ask the officials why all of a sudden an East Lantau metropolis is proposed? Have there been any studies? Before C.Y. Leung came and made a speech about the ELM, had any study been carried out? No, I think Albert Chen is wrong. This proposal was made in 1987. It was said that it should not be pursued because all of Hong Kong's money would be spent. So is it that we have Li Ka-shing taking precedence over C.Y. Leung? So do you want to be the next term CE? If you do, then you should follow my advice. You should follow my advice. I don't know why you are proposing this East Lantau metropolis concept. Is it that Mr. Li Ka-shing is still very influential, or is it that there are some instructions from the north? You're coming to us for funding to carry out the studies. We'll have to let you carry out the studies. Yes, I know we have to let you carry out studies, but you must give us adequate information. So how come there is this concept of an East Lantau metropolis? You're not a principal official. You are one rank lower than that of a principal official. I want to know whether the CE has sought your advice in proposing this East Lantau metropolis. In fact, in 2011, Chairman, we had the enhancing land supply strategy, and members expressed support for a six-pronged approach for enhancing land supply. And then some criteria were proposed concerning reclamation, and so we looked at the waters in Hong Kong, and we were of the view that maybe it would be possible to have an artificial island near Khao Yi Chau. This location is quite near to the urban area, and so it can be developed into a new town and also a core business district. Thank you. In 2011, C.Y. Leung was still not the CE. So you carry out the public engagement. You had to analyze and publish the comments. So when you did the public engagement, that was in Donald Tsang's days. And then the proposal came from C.Y. Leung. Now, Chairman, in fact, I said very clearly that we had the public engagement and the internal study in 2011. We had the preliminary study, and now we have these proposals, and we want to secure funding to carry out technical studies. Thank you. Mr. Wai Kwok. Chairman, what I want to say is very simple. I support item 768CL, strategic studies for artificial islands in the central waters. We're not talking about works going to commence immediately. We are only talking about strategic studies. Now, in fact, change of land use, land resumption, these are things that are going on all the time. But then only small plots of land can be made available through these measures. If we want to have a large stretch of land, if we want to be far-sighted enough to look into the look into the distant future, then we need to explore the possibility of reclamation. Now, if you don't want reclamation near the shore, then of course reclamation will have to take place offshore. And the Permanent Secretary has explained why the eastern waters and the western waters have not been chosen. And then we are told that the government needs $226 million for the study. Yes, I think concerning port operation, marine traffic, EIA, impact on the fisheries industry, consultation of stakeholders, these are concerns that have been raised by members, and they are legitimate concerns. And these are precisely the tasks to be included in the strategic studies. And so I really don't think we need to have too much reservation at this stage. I think we need to have studies. So that's why I think the money is worth spending. And I am rather surprised to see members objecting to this proposal. Now, in the British colonial era, in Sir Wilson's days, there was a decision made to build the new airport, and the new airport in fact was an artificial island. The artificial island was as big as Kowloon Peninsula. And has there been any adverse impact on the marine ecology? Now, the water quality in the area is still very good. We are now discussing reclamation for the development of the third runway. And I want to say that as a professional engineer, I think this is technically feasible. But of course, engineering and feasibility studies need to be carried out. And I'm sure engineers are able to strike the right balance between engineering and conservation. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Y. Yes, I thank Mr. Lo for his comments. We really need to do adequate preparation work for the future. Mr. Yu Si Wing. From 2011 to 2013, there were 2 public engagement exercises, and some conclusions were drawn. And some members are of the view that there should be another round of public engagement. Can I ask whether the 2 public engagement exercises were comprehensive enough? Do we need a third consultation exercise? And how can we make sure that the third public engagement exercise will be more comprehensive? Is it really necessary to have a third public engagement exercise? And then second, I do understand that reclamation should be regarded as the last resort. Now, concerning East Lantau, or the East Lantau metropolis, can we try to avoid reclamation? Can we develop more land on Lantau? At the moment, 75% of the land on Lantau is country parks. So let's set aside 10% of the land on Lantau for development. That would mean 65% would still be country parks. Or can we use some land in the country parks for development and then carry out a smaller scale reclamation. Chairman, I want to say that in fact each public engagement exercise has its objective. Now for the 2 public engagement exercises, the scope was comprehensive. And when we carry out the strategic studies, we'll also need to carry out public engagement exercises. Planning is a long process, and we need public engagement exercises at different stages. Concerning using country park land for development, this is a very controversial issue, and so we are not pursuing that idea for the time being. We hope to try to see whether green belts in the urban areas can be used for development. And country parks are far away from the developed areas. We are of the view that reclamation may have a lesser impact on the ecology. But then, can we have a 2-pronged approach, reclamation plus making use of some of the land in our country parks? Chairman, as I have just pointed out, using land in country parks for development is a controversial issue. We'll continue to listen to public views on this. Deputy Chairman. Chairman, thank you. I understand that this panel is asked to support the allocation of $227 million for carrying out strategic studies for artificial islands in the central waters and associated site investigation works. I think this paper is mainly about an engineering feasibility study. But then concerning the development of the artificial island, the economy, the population, what role the artificial island is going to play, we don't have such information. We're told that strategic studies will be carried out, but it seems that this paper is only on the engineering feasibility aspect. Now, constructing an artificial island in the central waters will have far-reaching implications on the development of Hong Kong and also on the role to be played by Hong Kong in the Pearl River Delta region and the opportunities that it is going to enjoy. So before deciding whether to construct an artificial island, and if so, what sort of artificial island it should be, I think we should, from a macro perspective, review the economic development of Hong Kong. I understand that in 2007, Chairman, there was the 2030 Planning Vision and Strategy. But then in the past 7 years, concerning housing, land use, distribution of wealth, a lot of changes took place. And cities near us have also launched various initiatives. And we are only 16 years from 2030. If the administration doesn't carry out a planning review, then I will not be certain as to the economic effectiveness of the engineering studies. I think on the basis of sustainable development and long-term development, there is a need to carry out detailed feasibility studies on artificial islands in the central waters. But then these studies cannot help us solve our short-term and medium-term problems. Still, Chairman, I will not object to this item going to the PWSC for further discussion. But then I and many in my constituency are of the view that we shouldn't just carry out engineering feasibility studies. We should also look at our macro policies, and we shouldn't be using the $200 million to carry out engineering studies only.
Eventually, the resultant uses and effectiveness would be very much reduced. So will you be wasting the money? So I really have reservation over this. Next, Mr. Chen Hangpan. Thank you, Chairman. The government would like to carry out a development study. Well, that's understandable. However, for reclamation in the central waters, particularly at the Caverns location, if it is to become an artificial island, I have to tell you that you're doomed to failure if you want to connect the island with other parts of Hong Kong by ferries. Because now for the outlying islands, they already find it very difficult to get connected with other parts of Hong Kong by ferries. And I'd like the government to consider whether such a move will benefit other parts of Hong Kong. And some residents told me their worries. Peng Chau residents are worried about their tranquility on the island, which may be affected. So please consider their feelings. Whether you want to develop Lantau or reclaim land, news outside were rather confusing. And just now, or previously, some friends told me that they thought the government were to flatten the whole Lantau. So I'd like to take this opportunity to ask the administration a question. Will country parks be developed, particularly country parks on Lantau, be developed under this proposal of yours? I'd like to have a reply from the Permanent Secretary. And when it comes to reclamation, the fishermen will be very annoyed. You have to assess the possible losses incurred on the fishermen. You said you would compensate them, but the fishermen never wanted any compensation. They rather would like the fishing industry to be revived. From previous experience in the communication between the government and the fishing industry, the government has turned a deaf ear to all their views. Let me cite a recent example. The fishing rafts had been affected by the red tides. They need to have electricity to generate power in order to improve illumination. They need shore power. But for the submarine cable, the government said that it would cost over $1 million. But just one submarine cable, the fishermen were told that it would cost them over $1 million. So the fishermen had to continue to use generators instead. Now the issue has been there for 2 to 3 years without being resolved. This minor problem has proved something. Proved what? That is, the fishermen's aspirations had always been neglected. They always received a cold shoulder from the government. That's why all along the fishermen had been very dissatisfied with any proposal from the government. For this particular exercise, the government is to discuss reclamation again with them. In the past, they asked the administration to go and have a look at their problems. So will you reconsider discussing with the fishermen organizations to see what outstanding problems there are and try to solve them? Permanent Secretary, country parks, I have already said that that's a controversial issue. We'll listen to public views, including those from the fishing industry. For assessment on fisheries, $15 million had been earmarked for a study, and a sustainable development fund had been set up to study transformation, modernization, fisheries studies, etc. So together, this time we would like to discuss with the fishermen and conduct studies together with the fishing industry to see how we can provide opportunities for transformation on the part of the fishing industry. Dr. Chung Lai-wan, thank you, Chairman. Well, this project is worthy of our consideration. At the moment, many residents living on Hong Kong Island or in Kowloon West, when they want to go to the airport on Lantau Island, very often they have to drive northwards, make a big tour before they can reach Lantau and the airport. If we can develop Khao Yi Chau in future, if that can be connected with Lantau and other parts of Hong Kong, the journeys may be shortened by half. So if we can provide connectivity, Lantau will continue to be developed. Well, that's another merit in this exercise. At the moment, many people work in the urban areas, but housing is a serious problem. Many people have moved to live in the new territories in North East NT and so forth. And every day these residents have to pay a high price in terms of journey time and transport costs. In future, they may only spend 10 minutes in terms of vehicular journeys before they can reach their destinations. So members of the public will, of course, welcome this move. Now, you would like to expand an island that's already existing in the central waters. For the livelihood of the fishing industry, water current, ecology, etc., they will definitely be affected, and the construction cost will be quite huge. So I agree that the Development Bureau should carry out its studies satisfactorily. Another question. In future, will a road be leading to the Western District as well as Kowloon West? Permanent Secretary, for the transport layout, as Dr. Chung said, with this artificial island, we'll be able to connect Lantau with the western part of the new territories by way of Khao Yi Chau. And this is one of the options we'll consider in terms of overall layout. Will you consider a bridge, a road, or an MTR line to connect that with Kowloon West? Oh, yes, we'll consider various options. That's one of the options to be considered. Mr. Ip Kok Him, thank you, Chairman. Concerning this artificial island project, it will be a huge project. A six-pronged approach is proposed. I believe the public engagement exercises are to give members of the public opportunities to add their views. I'll support the proposals. But then you have to have overall consideration. Is this project appropriate? I agree with the Deputy Chairman that we have to consider the conceptual plans from a macro point of view. Given our present level of development, should our development projects mainly heading north? For another CBD, should you consider an island? Although we do not have sufficient land for further development, well, I won't oppose your study proposals. But then apart from Lantau, of course, you have to consider the vast country parks to be protected and conserved on Lantau, but you should also consider the western part of Hong Kong as well. That's more appropriate. Mr. Albert Chan mentioned the airport. I think he is just trying to dig out subjects for discussion. Well, previously we considered a number of options before deciding on the present location. There's no reason for us to relocate the present airport elsewhere. I don't think we can accept that. But for reclamation, once you have reclaimed a certain body of waters, that body of waters is gone. So you have to adopt environmental concepts. Why should we protect the Victoria Harbour? Because in the past, members of the public had a lot of views about excessive reclamation. So we have to be very prudent. I don't oppose the relevant studies, but in actual fact, the cost of the studies is rather huge. $226 million. Can you explain the details to us? Why such a huge cost? Well, 2, 4, 6, there are 6 concrete projects from you or concrete items from you, but from the paper, I can't see why it's so costly. Mr. Chairman, I'll defer to the CEDD to explain the detailed breakdowns. As for the overall development strategy, I agree that Hong Kong needs an overall development strategy. That's why we have the 2030 strategy, and we're observing it. That's why we have Northeast NT, Hong Shui Q, and so forth. All those were development projects proposed in the 2030 report. But of course, many assumptions then had changed. The pace of development for many major projects had been behind schedule. In most cases, for 4 to 5 years, So we have to plan for the future and prepare for the future. We need to analyze the demands, macroeconomic analysis, demographic policies, and so forth. And then land supply is very important for the other aspect. That's why for location, we have to do a site selection study. And then we have an overall development strategy and make that part of that strategy. And for this artificial island, we're also heading towards the same direction. Thank you. Next. The artificial island in the central waters involve a number of aspects, and the feasibility study will be more complicated than other studies. We need a lot of computer simulation and on-site inspection. So for the overall reclaimed area, for transport, connectivity, technical feasibility, etc., we need to do assessments. Thank you. Ms. Seto. Mr. Chairman, I'll definitely oppose these strategic studies. You haven't considered your demographic policy, and you're already proposing these strategy studies that will impact on our environment. On the immigration policy for family reunion, we don't yet have a conclusion. So why should we have this large-scale reclamation, which may not help solve Hong Kong people's problems, which may not help with diversified economic development? With this artificial island, the existing economic model will continue. Still, is a single-faceted economic model. You won't help with Hong Kong people's concerns. Very often the permanent secretary told us that that's not in his portfolio. But you are from the same government. We asked about overall policy. We asked about population policy. There was no answer. And in their bureau, they would like to proceed with reclamation at a quick pace. You cannot say that you are going to segregate reclamation from other policies and strategies. You cannot say that you disregard demographic policies and planning. You just want to proceed with reclamation alone. Well, after building the artificial islands and completing the land town plans, who are to be living on those new areas? We do not know what's behind the scene. You spend all the public money, but at a high speed, you may be absorbing immigrants not under the family reunion policy. You haven't got social consensus. You haven't consulted the public. And now you're segregating this particular project from the overall plan and ask us for over $200 million. And then you're going to tell us you have already started, you have to continue. Now, what about demographic development? What about aging population, etc., etc.? If you don't yet have a solution, if you just want to do gate crashing and proceed with reclamation, that's unacceptable.
I think demand management and supply management should go hand in hand. And so we're talking about supply of land. These are only preliminary studies. And after we've got some results, then we'll proceed to carry out land use planning. But then, Chairman, in Hong Kong, the birth rate is dropping. But then why is it that our population has been on the increase? This is because our government is at a very high speed bringing in immigrants for non-family reunion purposes. And this is totally unacceptable. Hong Kong people are so worried about how they can preserve their culture, their identity. And now you're going to use $14.9 million on the fisheries impact assessment, but no money will be used to carry out a population study. And I think I think the studies should be carried out not only by the Development Bureau but by all relevant bureaus. Mr. Chan Kin Po, I support the construction of artificial islands in the central waters, and I think artificial islands is an option that is cheaper and less controversial than nearshore reclamation or the use of green belts for development. I think this is the best way to increase land supply. And I think if this project is successful, then the public will know that having reclamation projects outside of Victoria Harbour is feasible and will bring a lot of benefits to Hong Kong. Some say that we should create more than one artificial island. I agree. And we can have different islands for different purposes, housing, obnoxious industries, and so on and so forth. In Singapore, over 20% of their land has come from reclamation. And in fact, we see reclamation being carried out worldwide. So, for example, in the Netherlands and in other countries. So, will you be looking at reclamation projects in Indonesia, in Singapore, and in Malaysia, how they overcome the difficulties? And if you really want the public to understand the pros and cons of an option, you have to give them all the facts. You know, there are lots of statements which are half true. In other words, people overemphasize the drawbacks and do not mention the advantages. And so I think the studies need to be carried out. And so can I ask the administration whether you've looked at successful reclamation examples elsewhere in the world? And then second, how can you make sure that comprehensive information is made available to the public? Of course, there are both pros and cons to any option, but I think the public should know what the pros are, what the cons are, and whether the pros outweigh the cons. Now, in fact, in Hong Kong, we have had 150 years history of reclamation, and in fact, in Singapore, they started reclamation only some decades ago. Now, in fact, we are using the most advanced technology in Hong Kong in carrying out reclamation projects. And we'll, of course, try to make sure that the public is well briefed. As I've said, planning is a very long process, and we will try to involve the public in every stage of our planning. Yes, we do have a lot of experience in reclamation here in Hong Kong, Chairman, but do we have the experience of creating an artificial island in the sea? The answer is yes, Chairman. The airport island is one example. So in other words, we'll be doing something like that. Now, because at the airport, in fact, the field can be used for reclamation. So I'm going to adopt the airport island model. That's going to be one of the options to be studied. And then, of course, near Khao Yi Chau, there are areas which are ecologically sensitive. We will be studying that. But I want to say that we do have experience in reclaiming artificial islands. All right, members. Now, in fact, all these two issues in fact should have been discussed last time. We have reserved 2 hours for these 2 items today, but then we've spent about 1 hour 40 minutes on the first item. 18 members spoke in the first round, and if I allow a third round or even a third round, then the last item will have to be dealt with at another meeting. All right, we've completed the first round, so I'll allow 1 member for the second round. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, you have 3 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you, Chairman. The Permanent Secretary didn't really answer my question. It is said that the study will cover all the constraints, for example, port operation constraints and constraints concerning the fisheries industry. But then I want to say that in 2007, a Lantau development brief was published after extensive public consultation, and the brief includes constraints concerning the development of Lantau. So why is it that the brief is not one of the constraints that you have in mind? So I just want you to answer this question. Does it mean that you will not include that planning brief in the upcoming study? Mr. Wai, in fact, I have already answered that question. We are applying for funding to carry out reclamation in the central waters. Now, we will, of course, be discussing the development of Lantau in the Lantau Development Advisory Committee. I think I've already answered Mr. Wu Chi-wai's question. I think this is where the greatest difference between us lies. Now, because there was the Lantau planning brief published in 2007. So, is it that the 2007 brief will no longer be binding on the government concerning the development of Lantau? Is it that it's going to be just a report for Mr. Paul Chan's reference? Chairman, if we look at the Lantau Development Concept Plan, you'll see that the central waters reclamation is not included. Chairman, of course, I understand that. But then there is this very important policy document. Is it that those constraints will no longer apply? Is it that you've already abandoned that document? No, we haven't abandoned that document. The advisory committee will also discuss that document. But here in the study, we are mainly looking at the central waters. Oh, I think I need to ask members 2 questions. Before the meeting, Mr. Gary Fan wrote to me requesting that a public hearing be carried out on the matter. And in fact, similar suggestions were made by some other members during the meeting. So members, what are your views? A public hearing? Yes, a show of hands, please. A public hearing? Any other views? A public hearing. Chairman, no problem having a public hearing, but what's going to be the subject of that public hearing? Artificial islands in the central waters. Strategic studies for artificial islands in the central waters. Do we need a public hearing? Is it that we're going to have a public hearing on the concept or on the funding proposal? Because, Chairman, we have to tell the public what views we want to hear from them, on what subject. Mr. Abraham Sheck, it's not too meaningful to hold a public hearing at this stage. It's not a bad idea to have a public hearing, but what's the public hearing going to be on? I think they need to work out the concepts first. Mr. Leong Kwok Hong and then Fernando Zhang. So there were the studies between 2011 and 2013, and then C.Y. Leung came and talked about the concept of the East Lantau metropolis. I believe Hong Kong people had not heard of that concept before. Mr. Y, I think you should tell Hong Kong people what you want to do, and people may object to that. Some developers may disagree with you. Chairman, I want to say that in the second public engagement exercise, nothing was mentioned about the second core business district, nor did the East Lantau metropolis feature in the second public engagement exercise. I think we should invite the public to give some views on these concepts. We're going to use hundreds of millions of dollars for a study. The public do not know that we're going to have a third core business district. So I think we need to consult the public. All right. So LegCo wants to hear the views of the public. All right. For those who think that a public hearing should be held by this panel in the near future, please raise your hands. Three members. Those who are against the idea of having a public hearing at this stage, how many? 6? So let's have a public hearing when a need arises. 8-3. And then there's another question I would like to ask members. And that is, do members agree that the item should go to PWSC? Agree? Those who agree, please put up your hands. Right, those who agree? Right, a member has claimed a division. All right, a division? Abraham Sheck, Chang Kam Lam, Regina Ip, Anne Chang, Chan Kin Paul, Yu Si Weng, Lim Kwok Him, Gary Chan, Loy Quark. They are for, and also Michael Tian. They are of the view that the item should go to PWSC. All right, those against. 3. Leung Kwok Hong, Wu Chi Wai, and Fernando Zhang. All right, so that's all for this item. And let's move on to item 2 on the agenda. Revision of fees for services under the purview of the Buildings Department.
Would you please invite the government officials to enter the room? First of all, I'd like to welcome the government representatives attending this meeting. The name list has already been tabled. I won't introduce them one by one. I'll invite the government representatives to do a brief introduction. Please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps I should briefly say that the paper mainly proposes to revise the fees for services under the Buildings Department. Under the user pay system, the government's policy is to, generally speaking, adopt a cost recovery principle for fees for services. In the 2013-14 budget, the Financial Secretary announced that the government needs to systemically review fees and charges and should first deal with fees that have not been revised for years and do not directly affect people's livelihood. For the various industries and the general public, the government has provided a number of cost-generating services like approval of plans for building works and alteration and addition works and granting and renewal of licenses of oil storage installations. Upon deliberation, we propose to adjust the fees and charges in the range of 20.4% to 26.9%, which reflect the actual work involved. And last time, the fees and charges were adjusted in 2011. The proposed adjustments will not directly impact on people's livelihood. We envisage that after the adjustments, the government will have an increased revenue of around $46.27 million per annum. We still abide by the cost recovery principle, and after consulting the trades and industries, the relevant stakeholders did not have any comment on the proposed fee revisions. We now propose to amend the building administration regulations as well as the building oil storage installations regulations to implement the adjustments, and we plan to obtain member support before tabling the legislative amendments to the LegCo in the second quarter of 2014. Thank you. I'll give 4 minutes to each member initially. Mr. Yu Si-wing. Mr. Chairman, I agree to the principle of user pays. But after 19 years, this proposed adjustment of over 20% is proposed. Well, whether you're doing business or carrying out any plan, you have to do preparation. Well, this proposed adjustment is up to over 20%, so that will pose difficulties to society. I hope that in future there can be a standing principle. All right, you mentioned user pays, but you have to tell us in what way. You need to give us a formula such that the trades and industries can do their own calculation. All right, government expenditure so much, revenue so much, then the trades and industry should be prepared for an adjustment in 2-year or 3-year cycles. Well, in 19 years, you're only proposing such adjustments. That's not really excessive, but a 20% increase is rather hefty. So in future, you should conduct annual reviews rather than a review after so many years. Am I correct? Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank Mr. Yu for his comments. For the BOSIR, there are 2 items that were adjusted around 3 years ago. That's rather similar to Mr. Yu's suggestion. In terms of approving building plans, the adjustment cycle had been longer. The last revision was in 1995, and then in 1998 to 2003, throughout the government, we had a freezing exercise within the government for fees and charges. And just now in my introduction, I mentioned that although we have a cost recovery principle as well as a user pays principle, we need to at the same time maintain efficiency so as to reduce costs. That's why in the past, in terms of vetting plans, in terms of computing, in terms of manpower, we had carried out value for money studies so as to enhance efficiency and reduce costs. That's why in the past, there's no huge demand for fee adjustments. And it's just recently that we reviewed the situation and therefore came up with these adjustment proposals. But of course, we'll take on board Mr. Yu's suggestion in future adjustments. Any more? No? Next, Dr. Chang Lai Wen. Thank you, Chairman. Is after almost 20 years that they're coming for these adjustments. It doesn't matter. Sooner or later, they have to come. As Mr. Yu said, they should have come much earlier, but it doesn't matter. They just want to recover costs. For the proposed adjustments, the impact on the enterprises will not be too huge. But we're just told that they would like to recover cost. The government is not making any profit. It just want to recover costs. So in the past 19 years, were you losing out to the enterprises? Secondly, Deputy Secretary, you're responsible for public works. Apart from you, I don't know whether other departments are also losing out at the moment and have not yet come for proposed adjustments. Will the government look into all bureaus and departments in this regard? Mr. Chairman, perhaps I should not use the word lose out before any adjustment, just like what we are at the moment. Obviously, we have not been recovering costs. As I said in my reply to Mr. Yu's questions, we'll as soon as possible review all these fees and charges to recover costs as far as possible. Mr. Ip got him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I basically support the principle of user pays, but it depends on where you're applying that principle. If you're talking about people's livelihood and basic necessities, I may not agree with you, because through tax collection, we have to take care of the low-income people. So we need to look into this user pays principle. You mentioned that in the past, the LegCo did have a huge reservation over this principle. But for the construction industry, Mr. Abraham Sheck has left already, proving that he has no questions. Otherwise, he would have stayed on. He should have stayed on. I'm sure we want people to be able to afford housing units. Well, under this user pays principle, I'd like to know how you arrive at this range of adjustments. Take, for example, the first item, 26.9% and then 26.4% for the next item. You're already recovering 79% of the costs at the moment. So is 26.9% a bit excessive? Are you only recovering costs? Are you including future adjustment, future inflation rates as well? I'd like to thank Mr. called him for his questions and the questions from other members. Let me briefly say this. Well, basically, these revised fees and charges will not affect people's livelihood. We've also consulted the trades and industries, which had no comment. As I said, the cost of vetting plans is rather minimal when compared with the overall costs. Well, let me go to Annex A. We now recover 79% of the cost. Well, we don't need to look at the decimal places. We just treat all those as 27%. Well, the calculation method at present is simple. Let me use item 1 as an example. The lowest fee should be $10,400 if we are to recover full cost. At present, it's $8,230. That is 79% of the overall cost only. So why we propose 27%? Because we need to increase $8,230 to $10,400. That's equivalent to an increase of 27%. So it's the same method of calculation, same arithmetic. Mr. Yu Si-wing, I share that concern. Now, for overall development, this proposed 20% increase is really not too much, because if you take into account the whole project cost, that will be rather minimal. But will something happen? That is, in order to beat the deadline, people will scramble to submit their building plans. Well, Mr. Chairman, if today we have members' support, then in the second quarter, we'll introduce legislative amendments to the LegCo for vetting by members. Yes, it will be a one-off increase. As I said just now, even though the overall construction cost is, well, a construction project may be up to hundreds of millions of dollars, but this proposed increase will involve, say, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I don't think the industry will scramble to submit their building plans. Mr. Leung, we did consult the trades and industries on this proposal. Well, let me tell a joke. They said whether or not they could pay more so that we can expedite our vetting work. So from this you can see that this proposed adjustment will not impact too hugely on their operations. Of course, our answer was in the negative. Unlike applications for home return permits, we cannot expedite our work. And we've actually exhausted all ways and means to see how we can assist the industry in the vetting of building plans. I think they don't mind so much about money, but time. Say, if at present is 60 days, they want it to be reduced to 30 days. At present, the development projects are usually more complicated. So very often the industry would like to have more informal communication with us, such that when they submit their formal plans, things can be expedited. That's what they want. Any more questions? If not, so much for this item. Thank you very much for the administration's responses. Any other business? If there's no other business, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.